Hi, this is Ali Arango of Little Guy CGI, and today I would like to show you how to quickly and easily retypologize a character mesh using Blender 2.79 and a free program called Instant Meshes. So let's get started. Okay, if this is your first time in Blender, I recommend you go to File, User Preferences, go to Input, and then choose Select with left click. Blender's default select is with right click, and this may confuse you if you're coming from Adobe programs or other 3D programs. Okay, what you see in front of you is the result of multiple tutorials that I made showing how to make this character mesh. Okay, when I click on the character mesh and then click here to go into edit mode, with the faces of this character mesh selected, there's so much geometry the character is basically glowing. When I press A to deselect, there's so much density to this character mesh that you really can't see much detail in it. It's just so much. So this character mesh, as far as animating, would be very, very hard to work with. So what we're going to do is click here, then click here to go back to object mode. Okay, for this character to be used for animation, this character needs to be retypologized. And basically what retypology is, it's basically when you have a sculpted mesh like this and then you basically, in a sense, redo the character mesh by going over it with other geometry that takes the shape of the current character mesh but ultimately lets you have a very similar mesh to what you're working with, but that has a lot less geometry to it that allows it to work well with things like animation. The way I'm going to show you today is not the optimal way to do this. However, it is quick and it is easy. And if you need to have your mesh retypologize quickly and easily, this is one method that you can use. Okay, the first thing we need to do is we need to export our character mesh as an OBG file. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we have our character mesh selected. When I say character mesh, to be clear, I mean our main character mesh. We also have eyes as well as hair, as well as shorts. We're selecting our main character mesh. So with our main character mesh selected, what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, we're going to go to Export, and then we're going to look for where we see this wavefront, .obj file here. So what we're going to do is we're going to left click. When we left click, we see Export OBG options right here. So among these options, we can leave these options how they are, with the exception that we want to put a check mark next to selection only. Now what we want to do is make sure we know where our file is basically going to go to. So I'm going to click here, click here, click here, click here, and then I have a folder that I made for this. So now, knowing where this is going to go, and with our check mark next to selection only, we can select Export Object. It's a lot of geometry, so it's probably why it was taking a while. Now it's done. Okay, if I minimize Blender, this is the folder that we put the file in. So when we look here, here's our file, and we can see for its type, it's 3D object right here. What you see in front of you is the web page where you can download the free program Instant Meshes. Instant Meshes is a retypologizing program. It is extremely small in its file size. It's less than 2 megs. If you scroll down in the web page, you can see some information on Instant Meshes. Here's a screenshot of the program here. If you scroll down to the bottom, you can see additional information. Right here, if I'm on a Windows computer, if you're on a Windows computer like myself, if you click here, you'll download a zipped version of Instant Meshes. when you double click on that zipped version of instant meshes, you'll see a window like this. If you double click here, you can see the actual program, and then you double click on the actual program. You can see it opens up extremely quickly. I'm going to click here to maximize it. Okay, with instant meshes open, we're going to click open mesh, left click here. Then we're going to go to the location of our exported OBG file from Blender, which is here. I'm going to left click here. I'm then going to click open. So that file is now opening up in instant meshes. So here is our exported OBJ file from Blender here in instant meshes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look to our options here. There's a bunch of different options. Your main concern should be this target vertex count right here. I'm going to lower this down to somewhere, I'm aiming for under 5. Okay, so since we changed that, we see this. The input has insufficient resolution to generate a mesh with the selected vertex count. It can be subdivided to a finer resolution, but any current edits will be lost. Proceed. We then left click yes. Okay, now what we want to do is left click on solve. Then we want to left click solve here. I'm going to roll the mouse wheel to zoom in. I'm going to hold the right mouse button to pan down. Okay, and this is giving us an idea of how our geometry is going to look. If you look at the nose has crisscrossed geometry. So what we can do is click on this tool right here. Looks like a pen. Left click and drag down. And instant meshes will try to change the geometry along what you drew, which is pretty cool. So with that done, what we're going to do is we're going to click export mesh. So we're just going to left click export mesh. We're going to put a check mark next to pure quad mesh. We're going to leave the rest of our settings as default. We're then going to left click extract mesh. So we can kind of get an idea. I'm going to left click and drag. Okay, it's trying to drag our thing there. So yeah, we have a basic idea of what's going on here. When you look at the face here, you can see that because I lowered down the geometry, the face doesn't look too great here. Don't be too alarmed about that. What we're going to do is we're going to left click on save. I'm going to name this male character mesh. We also need to make sure that we put .obj after whatever we name the file. So we'll click save. Here we are back in Blender. This is our high poly mesh right here. If you look at the triangles here, it's 581,314 triangles. So with this selected, what we're going to do is we're going to press H. We're then going to go to File, Import. We're going to go down to Wavefront Object. We're going to left click here. We're then going to go to the location of our exported retopologized mesh from instant meshes, which is right here. I'm going to left click here. I'm then going to come over to where we see import OBJ. I'm then going to left click here. So here is our model that has been brought in, our retopologized model. Okay, when we look here where it says triangles, now it has more triangles, 617,792 triangles. However, as far as I know, it's seeing this as well as our hidden geometry. So to actually see this, what we can do is click here, left click on this first. Now we'll click here and go to edit mode. So now here we can see the actual triangles. We have 36,000 triangles from what we had before. One thing that's interesting about instant meshes, when you bring in a mesh from instant meshes, you want to select everything. You want to hold control, and then while holding control, press E. And then what you want to do is you want to go down to where you see mark sharp, and then go to where you see clear sharp and left click on clear sharp. Instant meshes tends to mark everything as sharp for some reason. So I'm going to come back here, right here. So you might sit there and say, oh, the face is all messed up, right? Well, we have a much lower mesh model than we had before. However, it's in the basic shape, of our other mesh. Okay, so you might say, well, why is that important? This is why it's important. What we're going to do is we're going to left click here, drag this to the side. We're then going to left click here, change this to UV/image editor. Okay, what we're going to do now is with our mesh selected, we're going to click here, go to edit mode. We're going to press A to select everything. We're going to press U to bring up our UV mapping menu. We're then going to select Smart UV Project. We're going to keep these default options, then click OK. Now we have a UV map right here of our mesh. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to go here to Image. We're going to click New Image. We're going to click here, change this to 2048. We're then going to click here and then change this to 2048. We're going to click here. We're going to change this to normal. This color here is fine. We're going to click OK. So now we have this image set up right here. Now what we're going to do is press A to deselect. We're going to click here, then go to object mode. Okay, now what we're going to do is hold Alt. While holding Alt, we're going to press H to bring back our high geometry mesh. I'm going to press A to deselect. Now we're going to click here. We're going to scroll down to our bake mode here. See where it says ambient occlusion? We're going to click here. We're then going to left click here to change this to normals. See where we have this thing, it says selected to A. What it looks like here is actually selected to active. What we're going to do is put a check mark right here. Okay, what we're going to do now is hover here. Pull this down. We're going to left click here. When we left click, we have our high detail mesh that we started off with before we went to instant meshes. Then we have our low detail mesh pretty much in the same space. When you click in Blender on two objects that are occupying very close space, when you click on one and then click again, Blender will switch back and forth between the two. So currently Blender is selected on the high detail mesh. Okay, so this is the high detail mesh. We're going to double click here. We're then going to name this high detail mesh, then press enter. We're going to left click here. This is our low detail mesh. We're going to double click here. We're going to name this low detail mesh, then press enter. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to press A to deselect. The order is very important. We need to first select the high detail mesh, then select the low detail mesh. So we click here first, hold shift, and then second, the low detail mesh. With that done, and with this bake set to normals, and then with this selected set to active, what we're going to do is left click on bake. You can see what's going on right here. This is the progress meter, and now our normal is starting to bake over there. Okay, now the normal is done. Okay, now that we have this normal map, see where we look here, it says image, there's a little asterisk symbol there. We want to left click on this. We want to click save as image and make sure that we have this saved. So we'll click save as image. So that little asterisk sign is gone, showing us that we have this image saved. It's important to save this image because if you're working with images or textures in Blender, and if you have a Blender file saved, you reopen a Blender file, but you don't have the texture saved, a lot of times you'll lose your texture work. Okay, now that we have that normal map, we're going to press A to deselect both of our meshes. Here, we're going to left click here so we can see that we're selected on the low detail mesh. Let's left click again. Now we're selected on the high detail mesh. So with this selected, we're going to press the M key. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this high detail mesh to another layer. So I'm going to left click there. So now here's our low detail mesh here. Okay, what we want to do now is left click on our low detail mesh. We want to click material. We want to click new. We then want to click texture. We then want to click new. This says image or movie. That's what we want. We could go to here and click open to search for our normal file. However, since we were just working with it, most likely Blender will remember that, we want the images we were just recently working with. And when I say images, I'm talking about texture files. So I'm going to click here. There's our normal right there. We're going to left click there. So now we have this normal set for our texture. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to scroll down to our influence area. So we have this right here where it says color. Under influence, we're going to take away that check mark. We're then going to click here and go from solid view to the material view here. So now with that, what we're going to do is we're going to scroll back up to image sampling. See where it says normal map right here? We're going to left click to put a check mark right there. We're then going to scroll down. Now we're going to put a check mark here underneath geometry next to normal. We're going to left click. Okay, and now with that normal map set up, when we zoom in here, and our eyes aren't quite right, there's some other, things going on. But this is our low poly mesh. So when I click on this mesh, and I select it, this is 36,000 triangles. So I'm going to hold shift and the middle mouse button to pan. I'm going to go here, hover here, left click and drag to the side there. I'm going to zoom back. I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse button to pan. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold shift. I'm then going to click here. This is the layer that had our detailed, let go of shift. This is the layer that had our detailed character mesh. So I'm clicked on that. I'm looking over here so I can see that, we're selected on it. I'm going to take this manipulator and then drag this out to the side. Okay, so with this mesh selected, if I click here, then click here to go to edit mode, then if I press A to select, if you look at this number here, you can see this is 414,922 basically polygons. So I'm going to press A to deselect, click here, then click here. I'm then going to click here, then click here, then click here. And then now you can see this is 36,478 polygons. Yet, I press A to deselect. When you look at them, they look, very similar. So we have the retypology. The retypology from instant messages made this close enough so that we were able to use a normal map to take the detail from here to put this on this. So now we have all of this detail with a polygon count that's actually usable, where we can actually use this as far as animation. Okay, I'm going to press A to deselect. Okay, as far as instant meshes, I showed you the absolute basics of that, or pretty much the absolute basics of that program. If you work with the program further, I'm confident that you could get better results than I got. However, even with the results I got, you can see that you have a fairly detailed mesh that's fairly low poly compared to the original. Okay, my current plan, God willing, is that I will in the future be able to make a tutorial showing the optimal way to do retopology for a mesh. However, for now, uh, I think this method allows you to be able to have the freedom that comes from sculpting and be able to take the typically high geometry mesh that comes from sculpting and then have that be reduced to something that's usable for animation. Okay, guys, that's it for the tutorial. For all of those of you out there who like the videos on this channel, reshare them. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are new to this channel, if you like the videos on this channel, you would like to see more, please subscribe and thank you for viewing.